Now, speaking of suicide may have originated in the Highlands, but today's story comes from further afield because the podcast series is striking a chord with people from right across the UK and beyond. Suicide doesn't have geographical boundaries, so nor do we. So today I'm talking to Gemma, and hers is a success story because although Gemma struggled with an eating disorder for many years, which drove her to the brink of suicide, I'm pleased to say she's now well and here with me and happy to share her experiences in case they can help others. If you're listening to this and you find it difficult, remember you can press pause, and I'll be giving the details out for Mikey's line a little bit later in the podcast. Gemma, before we dive into the detail of your story, if anyone is listening to this who's struggling with an eating disorder right now, what hope can you offer them? What would you say to them?
I would say, please don't give up on yourself. Please, seek support. Reach out. Speak to people that love and care about you. Please, don't deal with it alone. It's a very, very, very isolating and difficult thing, and you need the support of others. And I suppose in my own experience, recovery has not been a straight line. It's had lots of twists and turns, and it's not easy. So please reach out, get help and get support, and it is possible. It is possible to have, a life free of an eating disorder.
Which is fantastic to hear. But let's talk about your life when you did have an eating disorder. How did it all start? Take me back.
I don't know. There was never a sort of a start date when it started or an end date when it ended, but I do distinctly remember as a child, I was very, very young when I suppose it started to develop. I had a different body from everybody else, and people noticed that, and I noticed that, and I felt different, and I felt that there was something wrong with me. I felt fat. I felt, I didn't like myself. I had very, very poor self-esteem. And then, when people are talking about your body and it's like, I felt like I was almost this, it was like a bit of gossip or something public. And that really, really affected me. It really had a huge impact on myself. And what started then was probably a lot of exercising, a lot of over-exercising, and, getting very, very sort of obsessive about that and disciplined, and then my grandfather had a supply of laxatives, and one day I just decided, this was a great, this would maybe help. I loved my food, and I was struggling to shift this weight, and before you know it, I was using laxatives, and then finally vomiting. It was really really hard to sort of give a timeline, because it had happened over the course of quite a few years before things got very, very serious. But and I suppose that's one of the complexities, isn't it, of an eating disorder, is it sometimes can take such a long time to diagnose and even within yourself to be aware that that's going on. But yeah, it definitely was something that dominated my very early childhood.
Very early childhood, before your teens, or on and into your teens? Yeah,
definitely. So as I said, I was 10. I was always, I had a different body from my peers. I had a different body from, everybody else. I had to wear a different uniform at school. I felt a little bit, stigmatized, I guess. And that continued right into my teenage years, and into my 20s as well. It was a long battle, but a battle I won.
So part of this was obviously about feeling that difference, feeling that you were, do you say, developing faster than everyone else. But I mean, what were you like as a young girl? In character, were you tough on yourself by the sound of things?
Absolutely. I was very, very tough on myself, and again, I had I had this idea of what I needed to look like and what was the right way to look, and I felt that I didn't match that, and I felt that it was a failing on me as a person. I felt that there was something that I wasn't doing right, so I internalized quite a lot of it. It wasn't somebody else's fault, it was my fault that I was this way. And that was really, really difficult because, I was very ashamed. And eating disorders are very, very shameful things. It was something very, very difficult to talk about, my weight or just how I was feeling anyway. But when I started to, engage in those sort of behaviours, there wasn't really any way to tell people. But what I did instead was, I suppose, I internalised it within myself and my own. I suppose I became my own worst critic.
Where do you think those ideals came from in terms of how you thought you should look?
Oh, you know what? It's easy to look back now and sort of recognise some of those things. But at the time, I just thought that's what everybody was supposed to look like. Everybody was supposed to be thin and tanned and beautiful, and I was short and stubby. And I didn't feel that I fitted that mould, and I felt, like, as I said, that there was something wrong with me, or I was a failing on my part to not look that way. And I guess, the media was a huge thing, and I think back now about, music videos and some of the pop stars that were there at the time, and actually, looking back at people like, Britney Spears and things, I think what a terrible time she had in the media, what a terrible way that she was treated. But I saw that, and I aspired to look like her. I remember, doing hundreds and hundreds of sit-ups because I thought, oh, if I do this, I'll look like her. And life doesn't go that way. But yeah, I definitely think there was definitely something about music videos. There was definitely something about, everybody on sort of, television looked the same, and I think now things are changing in a way. I think there's a lot more body confidence and there's a lot more acceptance. But you still look at the TV and you still think, or social media, or, just culture. And there still is this ideal of a certain body type, a certain way of looking, and I don't think things have moved so much forward in the past few years, but it's still the same in some respects.
How did you feel about yourself for what you were doing to yourself?
Awful. It's a really strange thing to describe, because part of why I did it was because I enjoyed is probably the wrong word, but I got something out of it. For me, using laxatives or being sick, and particularly binging and purging, was a way to control. And when I used to do it, I had it was almost a ritualistic way. I would do things in a certain order. I would, and I needed to have that. It was almost, this was my sense of control over the situation. And I, the reality was, I felt good after it. I felt good. And that's why I continued. And I suppose what happened was, after a while, you would feel good for a while, and then you would feel just rubbish again. You would feel crap. And I suppose as the years went on and as time went on, the time it took to feel crap, the time between it got smaller and smaller and smaller. And, I suppose at the height of my eating disorder, I would binge and purge, several times a day. Sometimes, I would binge, I would purge, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, I would do it again. The stress I was causing to my body when I was doing that, but I was in such distress, and it was the only thing that would make me feel better. But it only worked for a very, very short amount of time, and then I felt I had to do it again, and that was certainly the point in which my bulimia just spiraled out of control. It was a really difficult time.
When you said it got to that extreme where you were doing it several times a day, but I mean, was it also in response to stressful situations? If, were there particular triggers that you could identify that, I've got to go and deal with this?
Yes and no. Yes, there were definitely emotional things or things that I felt, and again, I suppose eating disorders are certainly in my experience, very insular. There wasn't anybody to talk about it. I didn't speak about it with anybody, so it was all in my head, always in my head, and it was always there. As I said, that inner critic was always talking to me and never shut up. And that was really hard to take all of the time, and sometimes to get that voice out of your head, binging and purging was the way to do it. And when I was binging, I felt better. When I was purging, I felt better. So it's really difficult, because sometimes there were really particularly difficult things and that I felt I didn't have control of. And yes, I would binge and purge, but I could do it just because something in my head said, you're a failure, or you're crap, or whatever it was that day. It didn't need to be a big circumstance for me to do it.
Was it always connected to how you looked? Was it always failure to do with not looking as you thought the perfect young woman should look? Or was it connected to failure in other ways?
I think, yeah, it was definitely failure in other ways. And I think it probably started in this failure of, trying to look a certain way and trying to be the certain, size and be the same as everybody else. But then as time went on, and as the eating disorder went on and worsened, it was completely self-sabotaging. I sabotaged everything in my life because I had an eating disorder. I did it right through uni, I did it through school, I did it through, work, I did it when, my parents knew about it and it was causing them great distress. It was something that I couldn't stop. It was compulsive. And all of the time in that inner critic, and it was talking to me, it was saying, you're a failure as a human being. You're a failure. You're not going to school, or you're not doing well at uni, or you're upsetting your mum, or you're causing all of this stress. So I just became a failure. Full stop. That's how I felt, and definitely as it progressed over the years, that failure got worse. But also, I blamed myself for everything that I maybe wasn't achieving, or I wasn't doing, or when actually the thing that was sabotaging everything was the fact that I had this eating disorder. It was the fact that I couldn't get out of my own head. I couldn't really live the life that I wanted to live, because the whole time I was managing this.
Well, I can imagine. I mean, it sounds such a profoundly confusing and conflicted way of existing and being. And if you were binging and purging that many times a day, it must have just taken over everything. I mean, I can imagine you worrying through the whole of a day. Is also, if this was a kind of guilty secret, how you keep maintaining that kind of lifestyle but then keeping it from everyone else at the same time. Did that become quite a difficult thing to do?
Absolutely. It's funny, I suppose it ate away at me, because it was something that was, I didn't discuss with anybody. I couldn't share it with friends. The shame and the stigma around it, I couldn't speak to anybody about it. I certainly wouldn't speak to, my parents about it, and it was very secretive. It was, even having to time things when I was at home, and even when that was, when I wasn't binging and purging, it was always on my mind. And again, that inner critic in me, you've eaten this, or you've not done this, or why can't you be more like this person, or why are you doing crap at school, and it was just this there was nothing that I felt that I could do right. And I think, yeah, I mean, certainly how it was a secret for a long time. It was definitely a secret for a long time. My parents found out. I was working a job in a restaurant. I had a sort of summer job, and again I was binging and purging as part of my working, so that wasn't great, and I ended up in hospital. I ended up with chest pains. It turned out I think I had inflamed a rib from everything that I was doing, and to have my mum come into A&E and have to sort of say this is going on was just awful. It was just probably one of the most awful things I've ever had to do in my entire life. Was say I've been doing this for quite a while, and
by that point, how long had you been doing this?
Oh, that's hard to say, but definitely probably the laxatives would have been maybe 4 years, and the binging and purging maybe 2. So it was a long time. I was able to hide it for a very long time, and almost I was proud of it. I was proud that I thought, oh, I'm doing a good job of hiding this, but inside I was absolutely falling apart. I was a mess.
So where did that falling apart inside lead you to? I mean, how did all this impact on your mental health?
It was huge. I had no confidence in myself. I probably did nothing to help myself. I was a bit out of control. I felt out of control, and I felt that everything was moving around me, and I just wanted to take a hold of it. And I suppose that's control. I just wanted to have that control, and when things, everything in my life that I had control over, I felt I didn't have control over. But the only thing that I could control was the fact that I could binge and purge, that I could, it became so important, which is of course why, it happened, at its worst point repeatedly, because I needed that just to gain a sense of control, just to feel alive sometimes, to be really honest. Because I started to get so numb inside, and it was a really horrible time before I sort of started to seek help. It really didn't feel, I just wanted it to end, because I thought I can't live like this. This is not a life. If this is, my whole world is going to be dominated by, binging, purging, using laxatives, trying to do exercise, trying to, even things like, like I couldn't sit still at that point. I would have to pace, because I thought, well, I'm using up calories at that point, So it was just absolute despair. This had just taken over my whole life.
You said you wanted it to end. Did you consider taking your life?
Yeah. I attempted it. I did end up in hospital. I ended up being treated as an inpatient for a few weeks, and it was, looking back on it now, it was a very reactive thing to do, but I didn't know what else to do. I just couldn't deal with it anymore, and I remember at the time just not being able to, my parents were so angry with me. My mum was so angry with me and so frustrated, and I just thought, I'm letting her down, and I'm letting my family down, and I'm letting myself down, and what's the point if this is going to be my life, if all I'm ever going to do is just the same cycle. I just thought, no, I don't want to do that anymore, and that seemed the only way out. It really, really did. It really did at that time.
I want to come on to talk about how things changed. But just before I do, if listening to this is striking a chord with you, don't forget it is okay not to be okay. And if you need someone to talk to, you can text Mikey's line on 07786 20 77 55 or contact them via Messenger, web chat or Twitter. And the number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. And that's Sunday to Thursday, 6pm to 10pm, Friday to Saturday, 7pm to 7am, or you can go and visit them. They are at The Hive, 19 Academy Street, Inverness. They're open 7 days a week from 6pm to 10pm. Gemma, there's no doubt you were in a really dark and difficult place. So I'm really intrigued to know how and when you started to turn things around and have change in your life.
I suppose, like I said at the start, the journey wasn't straight. It wasn't a straight line. I certainly think it helped when I went into hospital. It helped, I suppose, getting that diagnosis, getting an understanding, and getting that support. But it didn't, it took for a long time after, for me to really, I suppose, really sort of tackle it. I think it wasn't until I went to uni, and again, I wasn't living at home. I had my independence, I had my autonomy, I could do what I liked, and things got very, very bad again, particularly bad. But also, it was around that time that I was really starting to see the effect that it had had, because it had such a huge impact, had a huge impact on my exams and on my schooling, and I was doing the same thing to my university, and I felt like again, that I wasn't doing I was failing myself. It got to that point where I thought, is this going to be my whole life? Is this going to be everything that I achieve? And actually, I wanted something. I wanted normality. I wanted relationships. I wanted to be free. I just felt like I had this weight on my shoulders. It was such a heavy weight that I was carrying all the time, and I feel that was hiding it from everybody. It was trying to look the right way for my parents. It was trying to hide things from uni. It was trying to hide things from friends. It was trying to hide things from myself, and I couldn't do it. And I think that's when the change came. It came. I don't want to live my life like this, and even though I had been, I had sort of my diagnosis a few years before that. It took a long time for that to make sense, I suppose. For it to resonate that actually what I was doing was really self-sabotage. It was sabotaging my own life, and actually, if I wanted to get on with my life and I wanted to do all the things that I wanted to do, I had to overcome this. And I think at the same time I'd gotten involved. I'd been part of. I had been seeing. I'd still been in. Support. And still receiving sort of medical care. I started attending a peer support group, which was great. And again, it was people in the same boat as myself. We were all the same age. We were all at uni. We all, and actually it was nice to be able to talk about it and to not feel so, embarrassed or, ashamed. These are people that were going through the exact same thing as me, and that my feelings weren't just mine, that actually other people understood what I was going through. That was huge. And that was definitely, I think, the first step, and we worked as a group, as a peer support group. We were really, really there for each other, but also working through some of our own, I suppose, challenges around our bodies, and actually having somebody tell you the not, your positives, or you being positive about somebody else, and seeing people for what they are, as people, rather than as a body shape or looking in a certain way. It definitely was the start of my recovery, definitely.
I can imagine it must have been amazing to be able to talk about all this when you'd lived in this kind of world of silence and hidden away, and this secretive world. I can just imagine that feeling quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
After where you'd been.
Yeah, it was, again, it went back to that feeling of that weight on my shoulders. It was a complete entrapment. And it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible, because I just thought this is how I wanted to live. And I used to think, I used to have these thoughts that if I just wanted to erase myself. I just wanted to erase myself out of my life. I just didn't want to be around anymore, because it was so tiring, just getting up and just battling this every day was so tiring. And I just thought, if I could just erase myself from my life, it would, and actually, you can't do that. And thankfully, at around the same time, that's where I think the table started to turn. And as I said, I was getting some really good medical support at that time, and also that peer support element of it was just huge. Just being able to speak to somebody, just being able to say, and it wasn't easy. It definitely wasn't easy at first, not at all. But when I heard other people having those same thoughts as me, and feeling exactly the same, and thinking, oh my God, I'm not alone in this. I'm not alone. Other people feel this way too. It was really freeing. It was really, really freeing.
Was there a point that you shifted from feeling like a failure because you decided you were a failure to realising it was what you were doing to yourself that was leading to you not getting the results you wanted in exams or school or university or whatever? It's a subtle shift, but do you remember that sort of shift in, it's not me, it's what I'm doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was part of the game changer, I suppose, in terms of my recovery, but also as time progressed, and again, it took, my eating disorder was I don't know I can't say the day that I stopped having it, or that I stopped, that I stopped binging or I stopped purging, but there was certainly a point where I started to become very, very self-aware that actually what I'm doing isn't a coping mechanism. Actually, what it's doing is it's making everything worse. And I thought it was the answer to everything and the solution, and actually it was the problem, and that was what really then helped me to sort of to overcome the behaviors that I was doing. It was that fact that it was just adding to the problem. It was going to make me feel better, but it wasn't going to make me feel better for long term. And it's funny now, because I experienced my eating disorder for a very long time. This is going into my my 20s, and I think I really only had a handle on it in my mid 20s, and it was that kind of by the end, by the time I felt that I was becoming okay, it was almost like, why would I want to do this to myself? Why would I want to, so that changed, questioning myself why, and having that self-awareness that it was really, really damaging to me.
Which sounds like you started to like yourself a bit better.
Yeah. And I think over the years that came with that came acceptance. It was this acceptance that this is who I am, and actually, I'm never going to look like, some of these people on the magazines, and actually that's okay, but it was a more sort of nuanced things, like, I don't have to do this, that, or the other thing. I don't have to achieve this. I don't have to be X, Y, or Z. I can just be me. That was the true acceptance, you know, and that was the point where I realized this, you know, this started as something about my body, but actually it was so much more. It was about me as a person. It was about my identity. It was about who I represented, what I thought I was, you know, and that was huge. And that acceptance of myself was definitely the start of sort of saying, why do I want to damage my body? Why do I want to carry this weight? Why do I want to have this inner critic in my head? You know, it's not helping me. And that was huge. That was a huge turning point.
Do you think there was anything in particular that allowed you to start accepting and liking yourself? Because it almost sounds like you were addicted to not liking yourself. So I'm just wondering if there were particular things that helped you that, you know, others might take inspiration from.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never looked at it like that.
Addicted to not liking yourself.
myself.
Well, you seem to be a bit addicted to being horrible to yourself. Let's put it that way.
But at the time, I didn't see it as being horrible. I thought it was, you know, it was almost an act of kindness. I was doing myself, you know, and that's where it changed. It was understanding what this was doing to my body. It was understanding what it was doing to my mind. It was understanding what it was doing to my life. You know, it was holding me back essentially. And when I recognized that actually, you know, when I was doing, you know, when I was getting out and I was enjoying life and I was doing the things that actually my eating disorder had held me back from for so long, and experiencing life and experiencing people and experiencing just living and recognizing that I didn't have to fit a certain category. I didn't have to, you know, I could be who I wanted to be. I didn't have to be, and also, you know, recognizing that it was impossible. You know, there was, I suppose, that acceptance came that I am me. I can't change that. I can try and I can fight it, but actually I'm okay with being who I am. I'm okay with that, and that's definitely the time you know, around the time that I definitely thought, I don't want to do this to myself anymore. I want to care for myself. I want to love myself. I saw it for you know, the self-sabotage, that horrible unkind thing that I was doing to myself.
You said something very interesting. We talked before meeting today. We had a brief chat, and lots of things you said jumped out at me, but one thing in particular I wrote down. And you said, it's made me who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that really snagged me. And I was interested to just unpick that a little bit. How do you think this really terrible experience and prolonged, you know, desperately sad experience for a young woman has made you who you are?
Yeah. I think I look at my life now and I'm really happy. I'm really happy. I'm going to get really upset when I say that. Oh my gosh. I'm happy. And I spent so long where I wasn't happy, where I was so miserable and so sad and so almost, you know, as I said, this weight, this horrible weight on my shoulders. And I guess that's why I want to talk about this. And, you know, is that there is hope. It does get better. And for me, you know, it's just having, you know, it's not having a hugely exciting life, but it's about enjoying life and enjoying the people around me, enjoying my family, having, you know, developing really good relationships with people, not always having to be you know, almost keeping myself, you know, because I always felt I had to hide a part of myself because, you know, because I was hiding, you know, I was living a lie for some, you know, for some time sometimes, and yeah, it's just that freedom and I, you know, all of the things, you know, I'm, you know, I think when I look back now and as a teenager, and as somebody, you know, all of the things that I maybe wanted back then, I don't want now. what I had, you know, all of the things that I thought were important, you know, actually they're not, you know, they're not that important. Having people around you who love you, you know, being able to go out and enjoy life, being happy in yourself, actually that's been the greatest gift that this has given me, and I don't, and for that reason I feel like it has made me who I am. You know, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't had this eating disorder. I won't know what way my life would have gone, but actually I can sit here now and say, you know, I'm happy in myself. I'm a happy person. I have a great life. I have a great job. You know, I have great people around me, and I do great things, and I'm happy in myself. You know, I'm loved, and I love, and yeah, all of those things that I felt that I would never achieve, that I you know, that I would never, that nobody would ever love me, or that nobody would ever like me, or that I would never be, you know, I just, yeah, I'm not a failure. I guess, and that's what I thought I was when I was definitely in the height of my eating disorder. I thought I was, in everything I did, I thought I was a failure, and actually there's something as well around, you know, what we see as failure, because actually it's not. If I could go back and tell myself, you know, 10 years ago, you know, yeah, I don't really know how to end that.
I'm not a failure is just fine, Gemma. You know what, I've talked to a lot of people for this series, and this has been a truly inspiring conversation. We're both sitting here with tears in our eyes now. And I'm so delighted to see you sitting here so well and so obviously happy. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me speak. And I would say to anybody who is listening right now, please reach out if this resonates, if anything that I have said resonates with you. Please reach out to somebody, go and seek help. Don't be trapped in this. It's not worth it. It really, really isn't worth it. And there's lots of help, and there's lots of support out there. And you know, you have to take that first step. It's the most difficult part. But you know, it's crucial. And I would just say, you know, don't give up on yourself, and you're not. The things that you think you are not. You are not.
I was talking to the remarkable Gemma. Listening alongside me is Shona McPherson from Mikey's Line. Shona, Gemma had to battle to be heard over cars, sirens, airplanes, everything a busy city could throw at us while we recorded. But I thought her message still came across really loud and clear. What about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I hardly noticed the other stuff. But yeah, there's something very raw and real about the telling of Gemma's story. And I was so struck, it stayed with me. I don't know how long has passed since she's had these experiences, but there's a real freshness. The way she spoke about the shame, this hiddenness, the secrecy of this life that she was living. And yeah, just thinking through the courage that it took to break that cycle of having this part of her life that was so controlling, and yet that step, she had the courage to move from the hiddenness of it to telling family, medical professionals, and then from there support groups, and showing any of us listening that support makes all the difference. It's so hard to do this stuff on our own, but by breaking that shame cycle, by bringing in empathy and non-judgment, change can happen. And you can just hear the difference, the shift, the aliveness in her life now, having escaped that entrapment. And it brought to mind a quote that I'll just briefly read. This is a quote from Chimamanda Adichie. "We have a world full of women who are unable to exhale fully because they have for so long conditioned themselves to fold themselves into shapes to make themselves likeable." And when Gemma was looking with hindsight, she said this wasn't even just about body image. this went much deeper to identity. And I just celebrate her courage for sharing that with us. And the final thing to say is she talked about having suicidal thoughts and making an attempt on her life. And statistically, there is a much higher risk. I didn't realise this until doing the reading, but more than any other mental illness, eating disorders really increase that risk. So anyone listening just now, if you're struggling with your eating and or struggling with suicidal thoughts, please don't be alone with the secrecy, the shame. Please find someone you trust. And Mikey's Line is here for you as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Shona. Don't forget, it's okay not to be okay. And if you need someone to talk to, as Shona said, you can text Mikey's Line on 07786 20 77 55 or contact them via Messenger, web chat or Twitter. And the number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. That's Sunday to Thursday, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m, Friday to Saturday, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Or you can go and visit them at The Hive, 19 Academy Street, Inverness. They're open 7 days a week from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Speaking of Suicide is funded by Mikey's Line, and the platform is sponsored by Highland-based family firm D&D Paving Limited. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, do get in touch, and if you'd like to share your story, we'd love to hear from you. Speaking of Suicide is produced by Adventurous Audio Limited.